Hello and welcome back. Hi. So everyone's back from the first breakout room where they were exploring what is nation building. So beautiful discussion, Charles. Hello. Where are you? Oh, there you are. Do you want to start the feedback? Let's hear from you what you chatted about.
Yes, absolutely. Just want to confirm, can you hear me?
Yep, you're good. All the way from where? Kampala.
Yes, Kampala, yes. Thank you, Julia. Yes, I would like to summarize a bit of what we shared in our group. I loved the the submissions by the members. At first, we had just a moment. We had Jenna submitted that nation building from the perspective of journalism is doing your work and not damaging the state or publishing information that may compromise or the safety of people in the country. And from my perspective, I shared that looking at it from education for sustainable development viewpoint, it is the effort of every member of the society, whether it's a child, whether it's an adult, a wife, husband, just about everyone doing as little or as much as they can to make it work for everyone in terms of peace and in terms of development. Then I also loved the submission by our other member, Mark, who shared that it is concerted towards development by everyone in the community. I think the strong point there is that it cannot be done in isolation. People should work together to achieve development across the nation. Thank you.
Okay, great. It sounds like nation building is a very complicated process. Lots and lots of different components. Interesting. Anybody else want to comment? That was from sort of an education and adult development and a media and adult development kind of perspective. Any other comments? Who would like to add in? Miriam, I can see you burning.
I was debating. Thanks, Julia. Good morning. It's interesting that Jonathan and I ended up in the same group this time, and we were talking about nation building, and he was referring to Israel and the shaping. And what I got was how the shaping of a nation is so based on the conversations that we have about it and where we come from in those conversations and our perspectives on it. So like my perspective on the country where I was born, where I have loved my entire 70 years, has altered and shifted over the years on the nation, about the nation and how the nation gets built and all the social changes and the conversations. And there's no simple, but it's kind of like, what's the conversation that I'm having? And if we were to look at it from the developmental stage, where am I in that conversation? Is it about me? Where does it fall? Is it about us, the group, and stepping outside of that group? I wonder if we could look at the peace process, let's say in Israel, Palestine, as the peace process conversation as a developmental conversation. What would that give us? And I would say that for many other nations, but one that I'm very familiar, well, somewhat familiar with.
How fascinating, Miriam. So you're saying that we sort of enter the conversation at earlier levels in the developmental typology whichever
Mhm.
version you use.
You're right.
At some point, where do we come to fruition, or do we ever?
I don't know. I don't know if we ever, because our conversations shift and we fall back
Mm,
and then they shift.
mm. How very fascinating. So almost like a process map of how a reconciliation process could happen.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Jonathan?
Yeah, I'm wondering if we could just back up a little and make sure we're clear about what we mean by nation.
Yes.
What is and isn't a nation, and how does that, we talked briefly about how does that map to country, and clearly it doesn't have to be the same, but what makes it different?
Sure. I'm getting a bit scared now, because we're not going to be able to tie this down in 2 hours. But it's an important piece of complexity to have here, is what makes a nation, and where do we decide a nation begins and ends, and how we build it.
In our conversation, Sam questioned whether nation building is a sort of helpful term, and whether it's sometimes, he didn't say it quite this explicitly, but used as a kind of discourse to exclude certain people, and whether it can be something that's inclusive of a very big range of diversity, who may have different conceptions and identities about the nation, about what nation even means, about the relationship between nation and state. And certainly here in Israel, there's a lot of debate and polarization around whether we ought to be a nation for all of its citizens, a country for all of its citizens, or whether it's in some way a Jewish country. And so that connects very strongly with what you're sort of questioning, Jonathan. And yeah, that's just.
The subject's terrifying me, because if you think of refugees and the fluidity of nation states, like, we've got a problem there in the definition, don't we?
Mm.
And who we include and who we exclude. And I wonder if I can just be expedient or not. Is this a critical part of it? Is a critical part here. Do we need to wrap this down, or can we move in with a very loose definition? And
I think going on what Jonathan said was also the other thing that came up in our group, which he said actually was around, do we ever grow out of it? Like, it doesn't matter how old your country or your nation may be. Does it ever stop the building, the constructing of identity for a nation? That it's a constantly, so in some ways it is, maybe that's the simplest way to put it, it's not a static thing. You don't get to a point, you don't achieve it.
Yeah, I love that. And just this afternoon I read, and I know I shouldn't laugh when I'm saying this, but 15 countries now want to leave the Commonwealth. So there is another nation state, whatever you want to call it, in flux. Interesting. It's constant fluidity.
Julia, my feeling is that rather than having a single definition to recognize the conflictual nature around the concept, and I think that there tend to be two poles. One is more essentialist, that says, this country has an essence, and that might be tied to a historical reality or some, idea, what have you. And then it's around who's loyal to, who belongs to that, central idea or that history or whatever. And each of those will be a bit different. And then the other is, whoever's on the bus get an equal say in where the bus is going. And it's a much more distributed, a participatory concept where there's no normative claim that you have to be authentic to some, essence. And to me, I think the the polarization and the conflict in many countries, I don't want to say all countries, heaven forbid, but in many countries at least, is around that essential tension. And so I think, for me, it would be more helpful to think about that as a tension rather than siding, even though maybe all of us on the call in our own personal identities or lives prefer one or the other, but that wouldn't recognize the full complexity of it to me.
It's a key one. Yeah, Alistair, come in. You know what's quite nice here is this geographic spread. So I know you live in South Africa and you have for a very long time, but I just want to bring in Zimbabwe here, Alistair, and hope that you're bringing a bit of perspective from there too.
Julia, I think you're psychic because I was about to talk about that. I want to pick up on what Jonathan said about the bus and its passengers. Just picking up on that metaphor, I think it's important to look at the bus driver and where the bus driver is coming from and where they want to go. So I'll start off from a South African perspective, having lived here for like 17 years. And in my view, I think Mandela was a post-conventional leader, probably at like strategizing, transforming stage. If you look at the values of the political parties, they're quite late stage. However, if you look at the action logics of the people, they're not quite up there. So you've got, and I think the benefit that South Africa had was to have that leader who was like quite late stage. And if you look at the history, he actually went behind some of his people to negotiate for like a peaceful transition from apartheid, right? So that's one aspect of my contribution. And the second contribution relates to Zimbabwe, where I'm from. I've had conversations with some politicians and I say to them, do you realize the health system is in shambles? And they'll say, we fought for this country, we were in the bush and we survived. So, and we did this for you kids. So, yeah, I made links to the whole Animal Farm book, right? So you find these leaders are rolling in Benzes, Lamborghinis in a country with potholes, but they will say in their speeches, in their manifestos even, that they are for the people, but their action logics are not there. So I think we need to look at these leaders and meet them where they're at, because the reality is these were guerrillas taken from the bush and they exchanged combat gear for like Armani suits or whatever. Then it appears as if they are acting from another level, and yet, you know, they could be coming from like a very spiral dynamic stage red, stage blue kind of state. So that's what I've observed, and I'm still learning. Quite interesting observing these bus drivers. So then that leaves the question, like, what do coaches need to be aware of when dealing with politicians? Do they get coached at all? I don't know.
Well, yeah, and then that's the question where we're going is what kind of interventions do we put in? I'm just wondering if anyone wants to come in on the last conversation before we zip off and have a new one. Yeah, Kristen.
Yeah, you know, I think the word nation is difficult. It's problematic because it carries a lot of baggage. I mean, I think it developed in Europe around the time that Germany and France and those countries became nations. It was generally on the basis of a single language and a more or less homogeneous culture. And in the nation state, the link of the state and the nation, what inevitably happened was that there's the nation, the people, the majority of the nation, and then minorities. And Mahmoud Mamdani writes quite a bit about this in his book, Neither Settler Nor Native, which incidentally, 3 of the countries that he deals with are represented here: South Africa, the US, and Israel, as countries where this became a very problematic thing. And and that makes the question of nation building a difficult thing, because what is it that is being built? You know, what is it that is being included and excluded? What else would we call the people that are somehow resident and part of the people of a country? You know, if we don't call it a nation. But that's perhaps in a country like South Africa, what we mean is the people of South Africa rather than the South African nation, which there was the idea of the Rainbow Nation, but I don't know. Maybe that's still a useful idea.
It's very useful.
Yeah.
You know, the idea that should we actually be doing nation building?
Yeah. But we should surely we should be doing something around those of us who are within the boundaries of the state in this country, you know, who have to live together in the same legal framework, in the same sort of political framework, it's the same access to the same resources, all of those things. And the very and diverse interactions across cultures that take place in this geographical entity thing that we call the country.
Yeah, and even in the diaspora. So I think the way I was thinking about using the term was, you know, how do we build the leaders? How do we strengthen their capacity to lead? How do we strengthen the structures of the country to implement? How do we, you know, implement and maintain and uphold constitutions and rule of law? How do we help leaders to make better decisions about fraud? Those sorts of kinds of things. But I'm absolutely okay with going off in a new direction, because I think this is just so lovely. This idea, should we really be bothering to build nations when nations don't really exist in the way that they used to? And the term is tricky.
Can I say one thing then that you prompted, Julia? Thank you.
Yeah.
You know, we're talking about ego development, right? So what ego construct is, we know, but let's try to extrapolate it to, and just say that a nation could be a collective ego, which is never homogeneous. It consists of all possible, let's call them action logics in our language, or stages or whatever. So and we know that this ego always integrates and disintegrates. So that's the evolutionary path of ego, this time collective. So I'm watching Ukraine developing now, and I'm participating. So I see how, which used to be called the Ukrainians or Ukrainian nation, is going through a turmoil and experiences beyond everything people could imagine, that splits it and at the same time integrates it into something new. So I think it's just everything is happening at such a speed. So you see all of it at the same time, how it integrates and disintegrates. And I'm just amazed at how consistent it is with what we think we know about ego and the in an individual perspective. So I'm just so curious about this evolutionary path, what's evolutionary in it and what's man-made, and how the context interacts and whether the context prompts this or the other. Well, just as an input.
That's fascinating, Anna. Thank you. That brings in a whole different view. And I'm wondering if I can mix that up with the question. So there's this brilliant guy, Jimmy Parker. I don't know if you know him. He's just submitted his doctorate literally yesterday, and he's defending it on Monday, and he's asked a couple of people. And he's an adult development specialist, and he is starting to argue about, he's starting to be curious and research the relationship between the individual and the group. So if we do support, thank you, Adam, for doing that. If we do support an individual to grow, what does that mean for the group? Will the group automatically grow? And he's particularly interested in measurement. I'm happy to share his slides with who's ever interested. So the question is, if these groups of people fragment and integrate in the same way as individuals, if we do interventions with individuals, is it going to change the group? It's a long-winded thing, but can we hope to change the group if we work with individuals? And how? And can I send you off into groups? So it looks like Charles is up, and right, so I'm going to put you in groups of 4.
Julia, can you just repeat the question?
Yeah.
Forgive me.
So a lot of us work with individuals. And let me just recreate this. So if we work with individuals, how's that going to build a nation? Will it? Will it do anything? Will it actually change the way things are?
Thanks.
If you go, so 15 minutes, it's 40 minutes past, so it's going to be 55. Yeah, 55. See you in a moment. Ilse, can I send you off somewhere?
Yes, please.
No, you know all those people too well. I'm saying.
My crisis is over, apparently.
Oh, good. I'm glad. I am. It's all the okay.
Well, don't worry. You don't have to send me anyway.
I'm sending you to here. There we go. You've got Anna and Adam and Jenna.
Please, I was it.
Hi, hello. Zoom. Hi.
I pushed the wrong button. I was like, I thought I was making a really good point. I was so excited. I pushed the button and it was the wrong one.
You were making a really good point.
You want to finish your point, Adam?
Oh, no, I think the point I was making, Julia, I was telling them about the intro of your program with our Exco, and that the fact that the CEO could say doing the inner work is harder than doing the more technical strategy work of the program that we've designed and then everybody laughed. It was an indication to the group that the inner work is harder, even though they laughed. And I thought that was I think something that perhaps could only have come from someone who has done some of that work and has realized that it's not just his finance know-how that he brings. It's the harder part is the personal development work.
Yeah.
That was the point.
Beautiful. And his worldview.
Yeah.
So where should we go with this? I'm quite keen on hearing about what's happening in, Russia and Ukraine. And maybe that's you, Miriam, you're also keen. Yeah.
I am, but I have a call in 3 minutes.
Oh,
I'm sorry. I'm looking forward to hearing the recording. I'm very keen on hearing it. Thank you.
thank you for coming, Miriam. Have a good
Bye-bye.
day.
You too.
But
Yes.
maybe what we should do is, how should we do this? So there's feedback from the groups, we can have chats, and then should we, Anna, how are you feeling? Are you feeling talking about it and then speaking to the groups, or?
Well, I had a feeling that my kind friends had to listen to me already in our little subgroup. So maybe I could bring something again, but maybe we should listen to the others also.
Okay.
I don't mind it whenever, Julia. So.
Okay, great, good. So groups, what do you think? Can working with individual impact the whole? Why should you bother? What were your thoughts?
It's complicated.
Yes, Rikus. Do you want to talk more about that?
We talked a bit about the validity of the analogy of a company versus a nation or a country. And where in a company, it's probably realistic to expect some level of change if you work with, if you work individually with leadership. I don't know about a nation or a country more practically. I don't know where you grab a nation, where the handles of a nation are. For a country, at least, the handles are probably the leadership. Alistair made the point of the effectiveness of Mandela, how crucial the qualities of Mandela's personality was in our transition. And I was wondering if that's really something, if one had the chance now to work with the ANC executive and one could turn them all into Mandelas over a period of a few months, what would the effect really be on the country or the nation? Even in the best possible case, it'll probably be decades for that to effectively filter through. I imagine. I don't really know.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, Mandela gets a very bad rap nowadays. He's seen as a betrayer. He betrayed people in order to make this coalition come through smoothly. So, the leaders will be judged differently. Yeah, very tricky thing. Very interesting. Thank you. Who else?
Julia.
Yeah.
Just to spice that point up is to say, where would the judgment be coming from in terms of, scales of development? So if I'm benefiting from a government contract and I believe that I need to benefit from it for me, my family, and those close to me, my judgment will be different to somebody who has a different understanding. So I think it's always critical to know what stage is the criticism coming from.
I think it's very complicated. you know, because it brings in all that stuff about if you support people to mature to late stages, will they behave more ethically? Well, not so sure about that one until they're much later stage when greater good might kick in. Maybe they just become better at fraud, at strategizing, or at later stage levels. I don't know. Is that where you were going, Alistair? Or
Yeah, I mean, that's part of it. I mean, moving up a stage or more is not perfection. You're always going to be human and be flawed and all of that. I was listening to a podcast that was comparing a corruption coming from a stage 1 person versus not corruption, it was corruption coming from a stage 1 versus a stage 4. I mean, there's more violence coming from those lower stages, right? A stage 4 person is white, we call it white collar crime, right? But there's less bodies in a way, you know, in the body bags.
So maybe it'd be lovely if you share that work. That'd be lovely to see that.
I'll look for it. Yeah.
Yeah. That idea of maturity and even personality coming through in how you commit crimes. And whether, I mean, an intervention would help. Anyone else want to chime in here? Because I could just go on and on. You have to stop me because it's
I'm thinking, Julia, that does individual maturity development work? You know, I think for me, that's a similar question to, does it help to have medical doctors who make individuals in the society healthy? Does it help to have psychologists in the society? Does it help to have teachers in the society, etc., etc.? So the answer is almost, of course it does. But perhaps the question is about, or perhaps where I'm going is that there's specific intervention points where it may be of particular value. And Joe was talking about the Partners for Possibility rebranding as, what did you call it, Citizen Leadership Lab. That is working specifically in a domain that builds social leadership. And I'm thinking, you know, when you think of working with political parties, as Rika says, I mean, even if you don't turn people into Nelson Mandela, but you enable them to have better conversations with colleagues and with counterparts, I don't know, it should. Maybe that's idealistic, you know. Maybe that assumes a linearity that isn't there.
Yeah. Kind of has to. Jonathan and Anastasia, do you want to come in?
I was really struck recently with the passing of Gorbachev, and, you know, remembered an earlier period in my life witnessing the breaking apart of what we now call the former Soviet Union, and the extraordinary influence that he had over history. I mean, now is history turning back the other way, apropos Ukraine and Russia, but leaving that aside. And I connected that with, and I'll connect these two things in a minute, they might seem rather random, but I've done a lot of work in schools, and I'm constantly struck and frankly annoyed by the way that many people in the education department here, and I think generally around the world, attribute extraordinary influence and power to school principals. And, you know, if there's, let's say, this is very crass, but if there's a power, there's 100% of power, they'll attribute like 85% of the power to the school principal and maybe 15% to the rest of the teachers, because you've got to sort of acknowledge them. And my experience actually is that power and influence is much more distributed than that. And a good school principal can shape and guide, but does an individual really have transformative power? And that's where I'm going with the comparison. did Gorbachev have transformative power, or was he happened to be born into a particular time where his role was unique and clearly had unique capacities and vision and apropos development stages? But I think to create transformational capacity, we need to go broader than just individuals, which is not to say that someone working with individuals is not doing important work. That's not the case at all. You can be doing work with like groups or creating a non-profit organization, create a program, or you can have a leadership development program, and it's not doing transformative or creating transformative capacity. So everyone, I think, has their role and their capacity, their possibilities. But I think that increasingly the notion of distributed leadership today, for me at least, plays into this conversation, that not to expect a given individual to be able to somehow wave a magic wand, and where we see that taking place. And I'm for all intents and purposes, certainly in this conversation, know nothing about the history of South Africa. I mean, I do, but relative to those of you on the call, nothing. So I don't know, where you'd look at your own history, but I think specific individuals can tap a zeitgeist. They have a very important role. I mean, leadership development, but that essentially you need to create a cadre, a cohort, a leadership community, an ethos that's shared, an avant-garde, that maybe it's a critical mass of people who share who have the strength and the vision, the ability to live in a different mental construct and then work towards creating it, which is very difficult to do for an individual. Very hard for just an individual to really have that transformative power. So I sort of vote for the cohort, I think, or an avant-garde.
Interesting. Very nice. It's never an individual. One of my favorite statements about art history, when I was an art historian 30 years ago, was that art history was a series of male ejaculations. They were male and they were discrete and they were individually located. Alistair, are you shocked? And I suppose we're looking at politics in a similar kind of a way. It's a system change rather than an individual. I love that expression. Anyway, Anna, thank you, Jonathan.
Well, let me try to weave in. It's a strange feeling that you agree with everything everyone says. And yet there is another higher order perspective that just dismantles the whole thing again. It's like Jenna said after my input, but it's all contextual. Yes, exactly. So if I'm using the egocentric, ethnocentric, and world-centric to exemplify this, I can see me and 100 or maybe 200 of my colleagues in Russia have been working for at least 10 years on the leaders, with their organizations, and creating cohorts and communities to the extent it's possible. It has nothing. It had nothing to do with political situation, and that's because we never knew how that political situation has a power over whatever we can achieve. So. Yeah, we were doing things right, in other words, just like you, Jonathan, say, we were building networks of people who are thinking in supportive ways, generative ways. But if I'm honest, we were silently hoping that this big guy would not come with his axe. That there's I've been living in Sweden for 22 years, exactly the years that Putin has spent in power. So we missed each other like this. So I've been coming and working and living in Russia in parallel with living in Sweden and in Ukraine all these years. So what I'm telling now is the 3 different stories unfolding with me in them at the same time. So I know how it feels to work developmentally in Russia and hoping for that effect that it will happen until the higher order perspective comes in with an axe and just hijacks the whole bus with 99.9% of power, driving all of us as hostages to the end of the cliff. So how powerful and impactful, and what have we managed? And so now the world tends to not like Russians. Ukrainians used to think, or tried, they did their fair best to think of good Russians and bad Russians. It doesn't hold, you know, because there's good Russians. What's a good Russian? The ones who are screaming, we're against the war in Ukraine, we're calling it a war and something else. Does it make you good? No, you were a part of the bad thing. You were supporting even implicitly by not doing this, by not screaming, by not, you know. So it's just such a mess. So I'm certainly, when it comes to Russia, we know, some of us know that this too will pass. It will cost extremely many lives. The nation, if there is such a thing, is going to be traumatized for at least 3 generations. So I'm sitting with the question, if Russia wins the war, what would it make the Russian nation? If Russia loses the war, what would it make the Russian nation? So we are applying the world-centric perspective. We're seeing the Russian nation as a pariah in the world right now. And everyone is wishing that they lose the war, or almost everyone that I know, at least. So that's one thing. I mean, also when we look at our own work, I sometimes am laughing also because when we work developmentally with individuals and leaders, we try to bring in these qualities of human qualities, vulnerability. In other words, we take perfectly fine achievers, even though a little bit overburned, and make them individualists, as they're called in our framework, pluralists and all that, you know. They used to have sharper elbows, sharper teeth. They could defend themselves. Now they can't anymore. So imagine this person at odds with such brutal force. They suffer like hell. What have we helped? We haven't equipped them for this kind of challenge. So, and everyone is trying to help themselves, and some help each other, but everyone knows that we just need to survive and wait until that happens and everyone's down the cliff, and whoever survives can go on. That's for Russia. And Ukraine is a different story. It's the other side of that coin, you know. We all want Ukraine to win the war, because then they can go on with their nation building, and they can go on living peaceful life and all of that. What would it make Ukraine as a nation? They've been rediscovering their nation, rediscovering, and they are now very strongly on the way to articulating, building and gluing the nation together, which used to be seemingly split apart, the eastern and western part. With the world, what the world was seeing on the outside, from the outside, was that the eastern part was pro-Russian, the rest was pro-Ukrainian. It was never that split, was never that serious. And what's happening now is the mending, and everyone's Ukrainian now. And how much does that cost, and all that? So you're right, Jenna, everything is contextual. And I really love hearing the story when the cultures become more susceptible and more conducive to development of each and every one where they are, because this is what we all want on all the levels in our organizations, in our nations too. But yeah, as you hear, I'm a bit conflicted today. And if you ask about Sweden, nothing to talk about, because on my map, Sweden, with their minuscule questions and problems that simply don't exist at the moment, you know. They will again soon, but.
Yeah, there were 3 kind of points that I'd love to pick up on. And the one I read in your paper as well is, you know, when we support clients to mature, sometimes, as you say, they're no longer equipped to handle a particular context. I think this is a powerful point, and I'm Just wanted to
And
ask.
500,000 of Russians have left the country. What does it make the Russian nation? Whoever is left. You can put them on those buses. You can put such drivers and drive them down the cliff. And that's the only thing, the choicefulness is that to leave the country, but soon maybe they won't be. Even that choice will not be possible for these people. I know how much they're suffering now in all the countries of the world, you know, trying to make peace with whatever is happening. That's a good question. Sweden.
Alistair?
Would you like me to take this?
Yeah.
Well, Sweden has changed also demographically since during the last 10 years, let's put it this way. We say that 21% of the currently living here people are not born in this country. So 21%. 5 years ago, there were 15. So just to give an outside indicator on it. So the demographic structure is changing, and with this, the level of development, if we may speak in those terms, is also becoming less obvious. I've lived in this country for 22 years, so I do remember a more homogeneous Sweden, where I could say that the level with no major disturbances was this greenish, you know, pluralistic. I'd also say in terms of spiral dynamics, so we squeezed the orange a little bit. So we have more blue and then huge green. And then a slice of orange there in between somewhere, which makes it quite interesting, you know, considering the social democratic tradition of ruling this country. Well, so now even in Sweden, you're confused now. You're confused now because of the things we never experienced before. Shootings, you know, shootings. People are afraid to go out in the evenings. That it has never been in the awareness of any people living here. So it's a recent phenomenon, but I mean, people are trying to make sense of it, and they're less equipped. Once again, maybe to support your idea, Julia, we are much less equipped at being in the green one to manage the others in the sound and generative ways. So, yeah, thanks for the question.
Yeah, thank you, Anna. I see Rikus has got something, looks like for you, Anna. Broader.
Julia, yeah, thanks. It's just something that came up while Anastasia was talking, and in the context of what Jonathan and Pete also said in our breakout room, they both raised the idea that the leadership is sort of depends on the larger context. They can Pete mentioned the tipping point. So the leader is limited, is to a large extent, and emerges from what the larger population is ready for and the direction they're moving in. But I think there's an important asymmetry there in change in terms of growth and destruction. And those are difficult terms, maybe more low entropy and high entropy. So I think growth depends to a much larger extent on the bigger context, on the whole nation, on all the different parts being ready and pulling in the same direction. Whereas a single person, I think, acting from the top can wield enormous destruction very quickly and quite remarkably. I just wanted to mention that. I think there's a real difference there in the types of change and the requirements for those types of change.
I also sort of linked to that, Anna was saying earlier, you know, when you have these kind of consolidations and then fragmentations, and I don't know if I'm putting words in your mouth, it sounded like it wasn't all man-made, that there's some kind of natural flow happening around how people constellate themselves on the earth. And then I got like really curious, like if we were like really madly, totally weirdly post-conventional, would we even intervene? Very interesting.
I know what you mean. I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't. Can you? I was just about to ask you to expand a bit on. Actually, I can imagine different things you might mean. I'm curious, more or less, what you did mean.
So, I mean, maybe it's like sometimes icebergs slam into each other, chip bits of each other off, and then somehow connect and glue together, and then create a new kind of semi-landmass through the violence. And that maybe it's part of the natural flow of things, that things fall apart and then come together, fall apart and come together. And that maybe a very sophisticated intervener would flow a little bit more with what was happening, knowing it was going to happen and it needed to happen. There is a cost, but it has to happen. It's inevitable. You can't stop it. Like you can't stop those icebergs. Or maybe, I don't know, I know you talk, it was your idea. Don't know why I'm talking about it.
Well, I know what you mean, at least. You know, if Facebook discussion is a way to intervene, putting a like is a way to take sides or whatever. Strongly recommended not going there if you are like me now in between everything, because any intervention, and I think I'm wise enough not to intervene too much unless I know why I need to say a certain thing. But people just share their ideas and they share their likes and suggestions freely. And in this situation, almost 100% of them will be judged by at least one participant of this whole thing. So you don't really contributing to peacemaking. you don't. And if you want to contribute to peacemaking, say, guys, let's all love each other because peace is all we need. But both sides will kill you, you know. So this is the context now. So it's totally inappropriate, even inappropriate at the moment. If you notice, I don't know if you noticed that mural in Australia. There was an Australian, I think Melbourne commissioned a mural in the center of the city of Russian and Ukrainian soldier hugging each other, and that caused so much in all the Ukrainian diasporas, you know, in the whole world and everything. I happen to know a Ukrainian ambassador to Australia, so he personally had it as a campaign to persuade the mayor's office to paint over that, and within 3 days it was removed. That wonderful mural, and no one cared about what the real meaning of that was, because that was inappropriate to the context at the moment. Now it's just, yeah. So that's what. But when it comes to interfering or not, if what I think gives me some comfort, when you can't interfere in any tangible ways. And tangible ways would be to share your thinking, to do something. When this is not available and you have access to more subtle ways of impacting the world, you can still interfere. You can, when thinking of peace, if you can't present it on the outside of this, you can still be praying for peace. You can be, I mean, the poor Pope has been cursed so many times for his whatever he says was doomed and damned, you know, by both Russians and Ukrainians. And but to persevere with this, pray for peace. If you can't bring the two sides to peace, you can still pray for peace, and that would be also an intervention. If you, for example, as some of my clients say, a Ukrainian lady, she said, I just made up my mind. I said to myself, all the anger and cry and hatred should stop with me. I will not be passing it over to anyone else. This is my stand. That's the only thing I can do. I will not pass it over to others. That's interference. So,
yeah. And was she later stage, Anna?
She was diagnosed as early strategist.
Right.
Yes, she was late stage.
Yeah. So there is some benefit in supporting people to move, eh?
I think so.
All they do is stop the cycle and the repetition compulsion. That's a very, very big deal.
Because you see patterns, right? You see destructive patterns. You can't do anything about them. They're just sweeping over, but you see them. And you also know that after flood, there will be ebb. That would be a better time to intervene. Hold on. Actually, yes, you're right, Julia. Now that I'm thinking about 3 more of my good colleagues / clients in Ukraine, all post-conventional, they are intervening. They are these hubs for people who can't, who need support and don't even ask for it. But just by being there, I think they're intervening.
Good. So there's hope around our work that we can make a difference. Yeah, I'm interested in other people's perspective on other types of intervention. Thank you, Anna, that we can do in our work. In terms of coaching and facilitation, what is your experience? Do you think helping a politician process their inner world more fully is useful? Pete, what do you think?
Not answering your direct question, but one of the things that came up in our group was the influence of the bureaucracies behind the politicians. And it's a both and, because if you help enable one without the other, it may assist, but if you can get both moving in tandem, it can be hopefully more beneficial.
So what are you saying? Interventions must always have something going in the context of that individual, or they're going to get lost?
Yeah, it was more, as I recall, the conversation grew out of the integral, if we're looking bottom right and bottom left, and the bureaucracies are, although they're people and they have their own cultures, were possibly more in terms of that system there. So you can change the politician every 4 years, but if the DGs, et cetera, don't change, you get an inertia that just, grinds on, plug and play new politicians and nothing changes in the very sort of flippant way. And this was a way of addressing to help loosen or enable a shift on that side as well.
Pete, yes. So like the new politician comes in and then we burn them out and then they drag themselves home exhausted and burned out and disillusioned. I see that a lot with politicians and government civil servants. You go through like a patch where you go, okay, well, I'm not going to change the world, and then you settle into just being an individual. I'm also, Pete, you're working with the whistleblowers, hey? How's that contributing towards the nation? Is that are you finding that a useful endeavor? How's that going?
So one of them, a lot of ill health, and so we've had one session and it's just sort of stalled. I don't sense that there's a desire to withdraw from it, but there's not a real drive to enable it. The other one, I think I'm glad I'm doing it. What I'm seeing in the individual is an easing of the angst. And I'm just trying to think, there was a comment. She made a comment which was an interesting juxtaposition of words. She said, I'm complacent but fearful. And I was curious because those two are not common bedfellows in my experience. And the unpack was complacent, that they'd done what needed to be done and that they could do, while still fearful of the consequences. But I sensed an ease coming through her that there's not a regret in what she's done.
Mm-hmm. And do you think your coaching has enabled them to continue playing roles as whistleblowers? I know that's a very tough question, and that Krista's also got whistleblowers. I've got whistleblowers, and any of you that want whistleblowers can have them. But yeah,
I can't comment on the first one.
Mm.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether there will be more whistleblowing, but I have little doubt that she has found new resourcefulness to continue making a difference.
Mm.
It may change its form.
Yeah. And do you think the adult development work contributed towards that? It's all leading questions, you know where I'm going to.
Of course, yes, Julia.
Thank you, Pete. Yeah.
Okay. You see, I just respond to being told what to say. You see, I'm nice and compliant.
Oh, you're fantastic, Pete.
She definitely gained insight through understanding of the stages, for want of a better word, and understanding that there's a mismatch of maturation. Whether, I think it's too early to say whether she's shifted in terms of hers. It started. I've got little doubt of that, but I wouldn't necessarily say that it's aha breakthrough moments.
Yeah. I quite like what you said, you know, like maybe whistleblowers become whistleblowers related to the mismatch of maturity levels. Is that what you were saying?
That's one of the contributory factors.
Mm.
So, as I recall, that particular discussion was around using the spiral dynamics lens. It just seemed more appropriate at that particular moment.
Mm.
But when she could see the different stages, and you know, Alistair in our group was talking about a lot of the red politicians and the possibility that this person is coming from a red worldview, and she's not. And I think it helped her to see a version of the truth that she could relate to more easily, rather than she wasn't. I sense she wasn't. It made sense to her. She wasn't puzzled by it anymore.
Mm.
She could see that, and that's still recent and work in progress. So I don't quite know the so what, if anything, but it did, in my opinion, contribute to her just making a bit more sense of what was going on.
Mm. Nice.
And that her role could be helping just to expose that and hopefully shift the system along.
Mm. Mm. Fascinating. So if we did more work in corporate and in state-owned enterprises, we're going to potentially create more whistleblowers.
That's a leading question I'm not going to jump at.
It is, but it's a really worrying thing. I'm really worried about the whistleblowers. Certainly in this country, there's absolutely no benefit. Every day we're receiving more and more people who've blown whistles, who are getting nothing out of it. Krista, maybe you want to talk And how do we support them to deliver the service when it's so thankless?
I think what struck me about, especially the one whistleblower, is that there is no support. They are shunted, they are ostracized, they lose friends, they lose family, and they go through incredible sufferings, and there is institutionally no support for them. They are untouchable. And so for me, the work with the whistleblower is on the one hand is like nobody is helping. It is at least someone is listening to them, whether I don't know if it will make, I think it makes a difference that there's someone with whom they can talk and speak. And I mean, this one with whom I'm working now, I've advised that he never blows a whistle again and actually leave the country, and just to get the last bit of his life at least livable. It's that bad. He's in his 60s now. The other one is a youngish man who is at performing level and who is very together, who's got a good corporate job, who's fighting this battle in the background with the city, and who's got big visions for South Africa and for how this country must be, and it's remarkable. So the work with him is very different. It is how to help him to move into that bigger work that he can potentially do. So it's very different. I think it's in some cases it's triage for individuals, and and in a way it's God's work, if you do that. It's like this, at least there's someone who speaks to them and helps them, whether it's for, it must be good for the collective. That's sort of a belief that I have. It's not based on anything else, that if you support an individual to heal in some way, it must be good for the collective, whatever the collective.
Yeah, it must be good. It must be good. So I suppose we're going to have, yeah, Jenna, yeah.
I was just thinking, flipping it around a bit, if we don't look at politicians and if we look at who's voting them into power, someone spoke earlier about a magic wand, giving this politician a magic wand to change things, and we assume change will happen quickly, at least within our lifetime, whereas it might be more incremental, more slow. Just thinking about how citizens maturing, the people who vote, how they're maturing might make them realize that the power resides within you more than within an individual or a political party or a system, something outside of yourself. Because there seems to be a belief that by voting for one person or political party that things will change and then you've done your bit. Whereas maybe the change comes with you being in charge of yourself and doing making different changes to your life, not relying on something outside of yourself. Yeah.
Be interesting to explore how we could influence that. I mean, Jenna, you're in a great position in media, just saying. Any other ideas? Changing systems.
I've got an idea. Can we do a supervision session on the conformist stage? And just add, because I just feel it plays a huge impact, particularly in politics, religion. I mean, yeah, if you look at how here in Africa, you know, I suspect in America, Trump figured it out and managed to sway people because he understood what was in the hearts of a lot of people. So, and you find that people at the conformist stage, just linking to what Jenna was saying, they don't have much power. The power is within the collective. So for them to even be a whistleblower is a huge, huge shift, because then you lose your sense of identity. So I think if we do a session on like, how do we work with that stage, not just to move them up, but just to make them better, even horizontally, I think we could make a significant shift.
Yeah, we've got a recording of an earlier session around that I'm happy to share, but it's always good to revisit stuff. So thank you for that, Alistair. The other thing is we've been having discussions with provincial government and people over time, looking at different political parties in this country and trying to figure out what level they operate at. And, you know, loyalty-based parties, such as the ANC, would possibly come in at earlier levels, and someone like the Democratic Alliance, who tries to sell itself on its technical performance, would come in possibly at a later level. And what's interesting is that obviously most of the population sits at those bottom two areas, but if someone was going to offer something that could transcend both of those worlds, maybe that might do something useful. Just a discussion we're having with various people. And what would that look like in terms of politics? What would, you know, achiever type politics look like in this country? And would there be a complete mismatch? You know, like there are some achiever kind of politicians, but a lot of them are working off much earlier versions of how to do politics. Quite an interesting thing that we're hoping to bring to some ears. And we've taken to some ears, and it's been quite well received. But now, yeah, it's complicated. So there is that thing as well. So we've spoken a little bit about individual interventions, some group interventions, and some system interventions. Is there anything else outstanding that people want to talk about?
Just maybe one thing, it's a nuance. I think it was Rick has mentioned tipping point. The nuance for me is more around achieving critical mass, which is maybe a slightly different way of saying it. But all of these interventions in my world should help move towards that tipping point, if that's the tipping point that's needed. So, yeah, I know, just if you know, the alternative to chipping away is to give up, and that's not an option for me. So I guess it's we make the difference where we can. I make the difference where I can.
Into strengthening the nation. Anna, do you want to comment? I saw you do a mouth movement.
Well, I was just typing in the chat in a way, but I can as well say it. No, I just wrote politics is far too important to be left to politicians. So the question, and that's the question for Ukraine right now. They're quite proud of some of their politicians at the moment, but they also know that the reality is much more complex than it appears while at war. When you know, it's right and wrong, it's bad and good. So it's in a way easy developmentally to be a Ukrainian today than to be a Russian, even the good Russian. But what the question that we could ask ourselves, how for a society like a former Soviet society with the luggage still hanging on to a different extent though, how do we shift the whole society's center of gravity from early conventional, where you're totally dependent on other people framing the reality for you, driving your bus, to a more self-authored paradigm. We say that the society needs to shift somehow en masse, en gros. A shift should change if we are to see, because this luggage is heavy. This luggage is heavy. How many more decades or whatever is it going to take? So we are starting to pay attention to the Scandinavian traditions of what the German word is still used for it, Bildung. Bildung. I don't know if you've heard of this as a phenomenon. I can write that in the chat instead. Bildung. If you Google on Bildung, you will, for example, find, you can certainly find a lot of information where it comes from, and it's over 150 years old. My Ukrainian friend called it the Scandinavian technology of moving, shifting consciousness en gros. As he said, you Scandinavians must have done something. You must have had some technology that moved the whole folks, you know, and from one to a more self-authored and self-aware center of gravity. So in Sweden we call it bildning, folkbildning. So it's a combination. If you can gestalt a construct which would combine learning, enlightenment, and forming from inside out, which is the essence of developmental work. Which over these hundreds of years have got its shapes. Policies have been aligned in our countries to it. So we have done something here, in at least from my Ukrainian friends' point of view, that we could share with societies like Ukraine at the moment, that are looking for powerful tools, powerful something that can help the whole nation. So nation building is somehow going hand in hand with developmental shifts from older paternalistic minds to more self-authored minds. So if you know of anything else, of any good experience where groups of people made qualitative shifts, not over hundreds of years, but maybe over decades, maybe up to 50, 60 years, that's as much as we can span today, and we can put seeds in the ground today that will give sort of, I'll be very grateful.
Yeah, fascinating. Something all of us actually should be looking at, something to fast track. And given, you know, that other thing about leaders, Europe's got 15 years to create leaders, and Africa, we get 7 until people get into senior leadership roles. So we need these fast tracking technologies, and we need them en masse. Really interesting, Anna. Thank you. There, Jenna, something for you to write about. Sorry, I'm using my connections rudely. Oh, thank you for that. We've actually covered quite a lot of different areas. Nation building, working on relationships, working on inner worlds, kinds of interventions. What is the inner world of somebody who can lead us? What is the inner world of civil society? What happens when we support people to mature beyond their context and they struggle to remain there? Quite a lot of different subjects. I'm really interested in this subject, and I just feel like I've got so much to learn and so much to grow here. And so thank you all for coming along for this discussion. if you want a copy of Jimmy Parker's doctorate, I'm very happy to share that, and I think he would be too. Which is similar, which is how do you measure group maturity? And I think he's done that. He's doctorate in home base in the US. So that might be interesting anyway. And Anna, thank you so much for sharing all of your wisdom and experience. And I look forward to seeing you all later. And tomorrow, if you wanted to come along, there's a Gen call, which I'm facilitating on how do we support the adult development kind of ideas and principles in non-Western markets. And it's lots of people from the East, I'm hoping, who can help us think through this problem. Because as I said, somewhere or other, rather rudely, maybe we're too woke to be inclusive. So have a lovely evening. And don't stay to work, and we'll see you soon. Adam, you want to say something?
No, thank you, Julia. Great.
Cool. Have a good evening, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Thanks so much, Julia.
Thank you. Jonathan, you want the doctorate, huh?
That'd be tremendous.
Yeah.
Thanks. Take care.
You too. Go well.
That was brilliant.
Do you think so?
So interesting. Very, very interesting.